Hello and welcome to part 3 of Intro to VFX Modding. In this segment, I'm going to continue with more in-depth VFX edits. This time, we are changing Sentinel into a blue electricity theme. I'm going to edit the existing spell, as well as pull in some effects from other spells. Let's see how it looks to start with. After spending some time looking through the nodes, I've decided to eliminate emitters 0, 1, 2, 5, and 7. And I'm also running cleanup after that. See how it looks now. A little basic, but it will come together by the end. And now that I have it broken down, I have removed some of the effects I didn't want, but it's not the theme I want quite yet. Looks like Emitter 1 has the bright, oily texture effect. I traced that to a light model, and it makes sense with this texture. So I'm going to go directly to the texture and just replace it with one of these preloaded lightning textures that VFX Editor has. Then I'll go back, turn the other emitter back on, and that is much closer to what I have in mind. Next, I want to implement a floating lightning orb. I'm going to make a new tab, but I will be merging this all together at the end. I've decided to use one of the Thunder 3 VFX for this. First off, I notice it flies into me. Because of this, I know it likely has a spline or linear binder. Those are the binder types that have a start and destination. This effect for Thunder 3 is what flies from the caster to the target. I'm going to go through and change the emitters on this timeline so they are all using the point binder that is already part of this. It's not flying around anymore, and instead it's just hovering in front of me. This is due to the bind point ID. As I can see here, it is set for caster and front of the character. Now that I have it centered on me, I'm going to find this easier if I want to reposition it later. I like how the lightning orb looks, but I want it lasting a little longer. I have broken it down a bit to take a look at this specific particle. It uses one of the lightning textures. This particle has a life value of 30 frames, or 1 second. But when I check its emitter, it has an override life of 17. Override life is an effective way of stretching out or shrinking the life of an effect. In this instance, it is essentially having this particle do everything it would do in 17 frames instead of its normal 30. I'm going to remove this setting because I want this particle to be about double its current length. That looks much better. Now I'm going to skip ahead as I edit each of these particles to be about 30 frames. Okay, I updated the life override for most of the particles. Particle 6 was skipped. I ended up putting emitter 0 particles at 34 frames for the life override, and emitter 1 had their particles set for 30 frames. I also decided to do a little bit of cleanup on this, so I removed particle 13 from emitter 1 and I removed emitter 2 altogether. Let's see how it looks now. Next, I'm going to address the size. I've decided I will have 3 of these orbs spin around the caster, and I don't want them that big. I'm thinking I want them half their current size. Now, one way I could do this is by adjusting the scale of each of the particles, which can be the process in some cases. But in this instance, I like how all the parts are in relation to each other, so I will control this at the emitter level as well. To do this, I'm going to set the emitters to influence the child particles. I will set each of them to all always. This means they will always be affected by scale, rotation, and position change settings done to the emitter. All done, and time to double check it. Sometimes when changing emitter inheritance, the VFX can drastically change and require more detailed edits of the particles. Luckily, it was not the case for this one. On the emitters, I see that there are already some scale settings, so what I'm going to do is cut the values of them in half and update. And setting it for half the size gets the look I am going for. Before moving on, I wanted to bring attention to the graphs. Sometimes you will see a node that doesn't have a graph for a setting, and that just means it is at the default value. You can still edit the values with the buttons above the graph area. To add points to them, you just Control left click. This works for any of the graphs in VFX Editor, including the ones for colors. For the graphs, I also wanted to point out the axis connect. This basically means any change I do in one direction is mirrored to another. In this example, I have X going from 0 to 5 over 30 frames. But since the axis connect is going from X to Z, it also means it is going from 0 to 5 in the Z direction as well. Now onto the color changes. I want a uniform color change for most of the effects. After looking through the particles, I can see many of them are set for a shade of pink. To reliably change the color, I'm going to make all of the colors gray and then change them at the same time at the emitter level. Particle 0 shows white, but it has all of these scale color options and the random color options. It also has these A options. The A stands for alpha. Alpha is essentially transparency or opacity. So for this one, I'm going to remove the random colors and the scale colors, but I'm going to leave the alpha colors as they are. I manually adjusted each of the pink colors to be an approximate gray of the same brightness. But I'm still seeing some purple in the effect, specifically with the lightning itself. So let's check the textures. And I see this one right here is still purple. All the other ones are gray, so this must be what's causing it. I'm going to switch this one over to a white lightning as well. And there we go. Texture colors will generally influence particle color. As an example, let's say I have a particle that's set for red, but the texture has a lot of green in it. Particle itself may look yellow once it's spawned. Now I'm going to set the emitter colors. Emitter 0 will be a darker blue, while emitter 1 can be a lighter blue. Now I set the colors, but I see the particles are still that black and white. Like with size settings, there's an inherent setting for color that I'm going to need to apply to each of these. After updating all the color influence, I now see the particles are blue. The VFX looks nice, but I want the lightning to pop a bit more. After playing with these particles for a bit, I found a look I liked, which has me undoing a few things I had set, and I honestly find that normal for the modding process. For the particles with the lightning texture, I am going to remove the inherit settings. And I'm also going to change this lightning texture to be the blue lightning one. And last, I'm going to add brightness to these two models. Default is 1, so I'm just going to give it a 4. And let's see how it looks now. Much better for what I had in mind. Next, I'm going to adjust the position. For this, I need both emitters moving together. Instead of using the binder, I'm going to nest these in a new emitter. I'm going to be setting both of these for all always, so they grab the position settings. Next, I want them spawning at the same times that they are on the original timeline. I see emitter 0 starts at 12 frames. To achieve this, I set emitter 0 for the generate delay of 12. Now, when I added this, I noticed this exclamation come right here. This is telling me if I have this timeline spawn without any emitters, it's going to be bad and it's going to crash the game. So I need to make sure I have an emitter in there before I hit update. Set it for the same binder. And when I hit update, it should look the same as it does now. There we go. I removed the first two emitters from the timeline as they are now under emitter 2. So now I'm going to set the position so it's away from the caster. Remembering Z is backward forward, I'm going to put it at 1.25. And that looks good to start with. But I want this to be changing position over time. I'm going to be having the orbs fly out of me and then back in. Here are some values I came up with after testing. Okay, and that looks good for what I want. Now to make it spin. To do that, I'm going to hide this one more emitter level down. This basically resets its view on scaling, position, and rotation. If I set the rotation instead on emitter 2, it's just going to have the orb spinning in place rather than around. and the last step of updating it on the timeline. Alright, that's looking better. I also noticed there's a bit of a black orb that's trailing behind it. I tracked that down to particle 6, so I'm going to be removing that from the emitter as well. There we go. That looks a little cleaner. Now I have one orb spinning around, but I actually wanted 3. So how do I get more? One way I could go about this is just copying the emitter twice and adding those to the timeline, but then I have to go through and update the rotation graphs on them as well. Instead, I'm going to use injection angles and create counts. To start with, I'm going to nest this one more time. Now, I'm going to set the create count for 3. So right now, if I set this on the timeline, it's going to make 3 of them, but they're all going to be in the same spot. So I'm also going to change this injection angle by 120 degrees. This is saying to spawn each of the emitters 120 degrees different from the last one across the y-axis, making them equidistant from each other. This way, I don't have to worry about managing multiple emitters or different rotations. It's just set like this. Let's check it. Perfect. Now that the smaller orbs are complete, I want to combine it with my first effect. One method I can do is to simply export the timeline and import it into another file. Instead, I'm going to show the library feature. This is a simple in-game database for nodes you want to save and reuse. On any node, we have the option to add to the node library. I'm going to add this timeline to the node library. Once it's there, it can be renamed and organized. So, if I want to reuse it now, I'm just going to go over to my first effect, right-click, and import. And now I have this timeline imported into my first effect. Spawning it at this point will not show the 3 orbs. This is because I also need to add that new timeline into the scheduler. And as soon as I hit update, I see some issues with this, especially the size of the orbs. The orbs look like this because Sentinel has revised scale settings as default. This isn't too common for in-game effects, but it is something to be aware of. To fix this, I'm going to go back into my emitters and scale this down. My other option is changing the revised scale, and with that I would need to update all the scaling on the original VFX nodes. Either method would have worked in this scenario. Now I am temporarily disabling the first 2 timelines to clean up the new one. Taking a closer look, I see the polyline particles did not adjust well to the scaling changes. These are the chaotic black spikes we see here. I tried altering these with different settings, but I decided to just do away with them. Another particle I do want to change is Windmill 14. This is one of the particles providing the black backdrop for the orbs. First, I'm going to make it a little bigger. Then I'm going to make it just a little longer here. There we go. Next thing I want to address is the timing, as it is not what I had in mind. I'm going to move the first two timelines ahead. My testing showed about 28 frames was good for this. That looks much better. Last thing I wanted to go over was the effectors. We can see it here as lighting up the ground under the orbs or on the walls when the VFX gets near them. I want this lasting a little longer, and I want it to be brighter at the end when they all merge together. And here is what I have come up with, lasting longer and brighter at the end. Also going to be changing some of these color scale options. I'm looking to make it more blue in general. And last, I'm going to tone down the brightness just a little bit, which I can do with adjusting the alpha. Effectors are not required for all VFX, but I feel they add a lot when dealing with flashy spells and abilities. To give a better idea, let's see this spell again without the effectors. Definitely doesn't look or feel as good without that environmental lighting. And with that, we conclude part 3 of Intro to Modding. Thanks for watching.